By the late 19th century, securing the Columbia River Bar became a paramount strategic imperative for maritime logistics on the western seaboard. This volatile intersection of river current and oceanic force represented a critical vulnerability in the expanding Pacific trade network. The river discharges at speeds reaching 7 knots, colliding with Pacific swells to create a relentless kinetic kill zone for unguided vessels. Navigational failure of this geographic choke point consistently resulted in total asset destruction and severe disruptions to regional supply chains. Despite existing installations at Cape Disappointment and Point Adams, the bar's approach remained dangerously ambiguous under standard operational weather conditions. Recognizing this vulnerability, the federal apparatus authorized $50,000 to deploy a first-tier navigational beacon, marking the southern approach vector. The initial strategic projection targeted Tillamook Head, a dominant coastal promontory offering 1,200 feet of vertical elevation above the operational sea level.
The interference is spiking. We're losing the upper atmosphere readings. I'm trying to reroute, but the distortion is too strong. The storm is growing.
System deployed there. Alternative mainland vectors required extensive logistical corridors through dense topography, threatening to immediately exhaust the allocated infrastructure budget before construction began. Planners subsequently shifted their strategic focus to an offshore basalt anomaly situated roughly 1 mile west of the dense mainland perimeter. This isolated maritime feature, later designated Tillamook Rock, presented severe topographical and environmental challenges to structural engineering and sustained asset deployment. Accessing the asset required navigating unpredictable swell patterns that routinely isolated the rock from standard naval insertion protocols and supply lines. In mid-1879, a specialized reconnaissance team embarked on a revenue cutter to ascertain the precise structural viability of the basalt foundation. Initial insertion attempts demonstrated the extreme volatility of the landing zone, immediately compromising the safety and stability of forward recon elements. 2 operatives successfully breached the perimeter, only to be immediately pinned down as oceanic conditions rapidly deteriorated into a hostile state.
You're doing great. We're almost to the helicopter now.
Retrieval procedures, forcing the stranded operatives into the kinetic surf zone for emergency naval recovery operations. This initial contact established the operational baseline, proving the environment was inherently hostile and highly resistant to permanent structural occupation. A secondary reconnaissance mission in late June managed a brief tactical insertion to secure preliminary topographical metrics for structural planning.
As you can see, the increased budget allocation will significantly boost Q3 projections.
For an additional
this looks solid. Let's move forward with the increase.
Capital allocation. With a total of $100,000 secured, the operational phase transitioned from initial reconnaissance to aggressive asset subjugation. To execute this deployment, authorities recruited John Trevas, an architectural specialist possessing extensive operational experience in highly volatile, hostile maritime environments.
Keep it moving, let's go!
The tactical insertion team approached the designated coordinates to finalize structural leveling protocols and initiate the primary foundation sequence. As Trevas initiated the beachhead, a rogue kinetic anomaly breached the defensive line, pulling the primary human asset directly into the surf. Despite immediate tactical responses from adjacent personnel, the rapid underwater currents executed a permanent extraction of the operation's lead engineering asset. This early systemic failure triggered immediate localized panic, directly threatening the stability and integrity of the regional specialized labor supply line. The psychological toll necessitated sequestering the operational labor force across the regional borders to maintain mission security and prevent mass desertion. Command transferred to Charles Ballantyne.
The Odyssey is now under your authority.
Thank you, sir.
To stabilize the labor force and resume operational tempo. Deployment resumed in October, when a temporary meteorological window permitted the establishment of fixed tactical mooring systems in the adjacent operational waters. Following days of persistent environmental assault, 4 advance operatives successfully secured a permanent functional foothold on the primary offshore objective.
Bring it down slowly, watch the clearance on the east side. Hold it there.
Including redundant safety lines, heavy manual drilling equipment, and localized thermal management units. Once the beachhead was stabilized, auxiliary personnel reinforced the advanced position, erecting a localized derrick structure for heavy material transfer operations. By late October of that year, the systematic deconstruction of the basalt apex commenced under continuous, severe environmental suppression tactics. Operators endured persistent kinetic assaults from extreme weather systems, significantly increasing the statistical probability of a catastrophic operational failure event. To mitigate unacceptable insertion casualties, engineers bypassed direct naval transfer by deploying an elevated rope suspension system for continuous asset delivery. This specialized breeches buoy infrastructure dramatically reduced the risk matrix, allowing continuous personnel reinforcement despite escalating oceanic volatility and current shear. The initial terraforming process demanded the precise detonation of high-yield explosives to aggressively decapitate the irregular basalt peak of the anomaly. Following the primary detonations, specialized operatives utilized manual drilling techniques to achieve absolute structural leveling of the designated foundation zone. This agonizing physical process operated on a razor-thin margin of operational safety, constantly threatened by unpredictable rogue oceanic surge events. In early January, a massive atmospheric anomaly overwhelmed the primary defensive perimeter, completely obliterating the secondary supply and storage module. Command
Phase 2 initiated. Reroute auxiliary power to the containment field.
From breaking cover and risking
Stabilize
immediate
the
environmental
pulse.
termination by exposure. Absolute operational isolation persisted for over 2 weeks, thoroughly testing the psychological and physical endurance limits of the forward deployment team. The structural system's resilience under maximum environmental stress ultimately validated the localized command hierarchy and significantly accelerated future operational momentum. By May of the following operational cycle, the intensive terraforming phase achieved its primary objective of a completely leveled structural foundation. Having successfully conquered the hostile topography through attrition, the initial specialized labor force executed an immediate and complete operational withdrawal. They were rapidly replaced by secondary specialized construction elements tasked with erecting the primary defensive infrastructure and optical housing units. Initial topological projections proved highly accurate, providing sufficient surface area for the deployment of a comprehensive, self-sustaining maritime outpost complex. The structural schematic integrated residential nodes, power generation sectors, and high-capacity operational storage within a single heavily fortified external envelope. Engineering specifications required a fortified structural matrix capable of withstanding the absolute maximum theoretical environmental load projected for that sector. The resulting architectural footprint maximized internal utility while actively presenting minimal surface area to incoming kinetic maritime storm assaults. This milestone represented the critical transition from raw environmental subjugation to the precision deployment of advanced optical warning technology systems. The central command node of the installation was conceptualized by Chief Engineer George Louis Gillespie as a hardened defensive matrix against oceanic kinetic bombardment. Gillespie's blueprint necessitated a tri-modular configuration, integrating primary residential quarters, a high-output acoustic warning facility, and the central optical tower.
The thermal imaging confirms the stress concentration right here.
Featuring 16-inch
We should
reinforced
recommend
exterior
immediate
bulkheads
reinforcement
designed to
for
absorb
this
and
section.
deflect concussive wave impacts. Internal compartmentalization was secured by 8-inch load-bearing walls, engineered to prevent catastrophic structural cascade in the event of an external perimeter breach. The optical payload's focal plane was strategically established at 136 feet above mean sea level to optimize horizon visibility. This specific altitude parameter was calculated to evade standard rogue wave crests while remaining below the region's prevalent low-altitude atmospheric condensation layer. The western structural extension functioned as the acoustic countermeasure module, housing a primary first-class steam siren to mitigate low-visibility navigational hazards. Thermal energy from the acoustic array was generated by dual coal-fired combustion chambers, which simultaneously provided the sole centralized heating vector for the installation. Hydration logistics dictated the integration of an advanced catchment network, routing atmospheric precipitation from the reinforced roof geometry into a subterranean brick-lined reservoir. Beyond basic survival parameters, the facility offered zero operational luxuries, forcing personnel to endure chronic thermal deficiency and extreme psychological isolation. The facility's primary strategic asset was its first-order Fresnel optical array, a highly complex refractive matrix designed for maximum photon projection.
The structural alignment looks correct, based on the schematics.
Mechanism required an
Yes,
$8,200
the crane
capital
placement is
expenditure in early
perfect.
1880.
Maintain position, easy on the
primary
push.
refractive elements arrived via maritime logistics by September.
We're heading
well
in
within
now.
the projected deployment timeline. However, a critical supply chain disruption resulted in the delayed delivery of the primary combustive wicks and reflective mirror arrays. This logistical failure rendered the fully assembled optical system non-operational, leaving the strategic choke point critically undefended as winter weather cycles accelerated. The operational vacuum caused by this supply chain deficiency would directly precipitate a catastrophic maritime incident within the immediate operational theater. In early January 1881, a severe low-pressure system initiated a prolonged kinetic assault on the partially operational facility. For 3 consecutive operational cycles, extreme barometric pressure drops generated gale force winds and zero visibility atmospheric conditions across the sector. A localized technical group
I'm trapped out here.
optical
Please
calibration
send help.
found themselves trapped within the lower blast doors of the central tower. Amidst the acoustic chaos of the atmospheric assault, the command officer detected anomalous audio signatures indicating an imminent maritime collision. Personnel identified the distinct
Tracking
distress
inbound threat.
vocalizations of a maritime
Locking
crew
coordinates
rapidly
now.
approaching the lethal
Deploy
perimeter of the
countermeasures.
assault anomaly. A high-tonnage British maritime asset had suffered catastrophic navigation failure, drifting blind into the Columbia River Bar's primary kill zone.
Deploy the
Recognizing imminent
countermeasure,
threat,
Lieutenant.
the engineering
Hitting the
crew
final
executed
sequence.
an emergency
Countermeasure
optical
active.
countermeasure, deploying a secondary
Run a full
low-yield lantern
diagnostic.
within the primary lens housing. Auxiliary personnel simultaneously ignited improvised thermal beacons on the exterior rock face in a desperate attempt to break through the atmospheric suppression. For a fraction of a second, the targeted vessel's profile materialized within the fog matrix, registering dangerously close to the defensive perimeter. The visual contact was immediately severed as the vessel was re-enveloped by the atmospheric anomaly, followed by total acoustic termination.
This
The
photo
localized
places him at the
engineering team
docks at
concluded
exactly
the
10
emergency
p.m.
signaling
Perhaps.
protocol had
But this letter is
successfully
dated the
diverted
following
heavy
day,
asset
signed
from
by
a
the victim
direct
himself.
structural collision. Dawn atmospheric clearing revealed a high casualty debris field saturating the immediate maritime perimeter of the installation. The 1,300-ton British square-rig transport, designated the Lupatia, had suffered total asset vaporization on the adjacent reef structures.
Command
Post-incident
vector
analysis
error.
revealed the vessel had lost its primary command officer during transit, transferring operational control to a subordinate lacking localized sector experience. Compounded by a potential geomagnetic navigational instrument malfunction, the replacement command vector drove the transport directly into the hostile kinetic zone. Whether the vessel's crew visually acquired the emergency thermal beacons prior to hull destruction remains a statistically unverified variable. The kinetic termination of the Lupatia resulted in a 100% casualty rate for the 16 human assets aboard the transport. Search and recovery operations successfully retrieved 12 physical
found
profiles
something.
from the surf
Bring the
zone,
equipment.
while 4 assets were classified as permanently unrecoverable. In a statistical anomaly, a single canine biological asset survived the kinetic event, successfully executing a 1-mile unassisted aquatic transit to the mainland. The Lupatia
Target neutralized.
incident served
Validate.
as a brutal tactical validation of the installation's strategic necessity,
Confirmed.
accelerating
Move
final
up.
deployment protocols. The complete operationalization of the Tillamook Rock facility required an aggregate capital expenditure of $123,493. The total deployment cycle, from initial reconnaissance to full operational capability, consumed 575 days of continuous engagement. This
Reroute the
represented
patrol
one of
closest
most
to the anomaly
operationally
immediately.
dense and
I want
technologically
status
ambitious
updates every
infrastructure
30 seconds
deployments
until that
in the
vessel is
history of the Federal
identified and
Maritime
secured.
Command. The primary optical matrix achieved initial operational capability at midnight on January 21st, 1881. A centralized combustion core initiated the primary beam, projecting a stabilized warning signal 22 nautical miles into the Pacific theater.
He's
The
good to
sudden
move.
activation of this advanced navigational countermeasure immediately
right, let's
suppressed
go. Get 'em
regional
up.
maritime casualty statistics. The wild, untamed coastal vector was systematically neutralized, mathematically shifting the operational advantage back to maritime logistics forces.
All
However,
systems are reading
maintaining
stable.
continuous optical projection required
Initiating
a
the next
constant
phase of the
rotational deployment
sequence now.
specialized human operators to the isolated facility.
All
Operational
protocols confirmed.
mandated
We have a
strict
green
deployment
light on
cycle,
deployment.
24 days of
Acknowledged.
continuous forward
The cycle
engagement,
is
followed by a
complete.
21-day recovery withdrawal. The psychological friction generated by extreme isolation, coupled with constant kinetic bombardment, routinely fractured operator cohesion. The initial commanding
Honey,
officer
look at
of the
me, stay with
installation
me.
submitted a permanent
Can you tell me
withdrawal
what hurts?
request
I'm getting the phone.
after
I'll
only
call for
4
help.
months of sustained operational exposure. Historical attrition rates for the
Take care,
facility
everyone.
remained
Good
exceptionally
luck with the new
high,
role.
with most personnel exhausting their operational tolerance within a single fiscal quarter. A fractional minority of operators demonstrated highly anomalous psychological resilience, sustaining continuous deployments for periods exceeding a decade. These long-term operators functioned entirely without external communications, operating in a total tactical blackout, save for emergency pyrotechnic flares. In the initial deployment phase, the facility lacked any dedicated communication infrastructure, operating in a state of total tactical isolation from a mainland command. The facility was devoid of auxiliary naval assets, relying solely on emergency pyrotechnic flares to signal catastrophic operational failures to passing vessels. Logistical supply lines were entirely dictated by volatile meteorological patterns, routinely delaying critical personnel rotations and resource deliveries by several operational cycles. In November 1895, engineering units successfully established a submarine telegraph cable, linking the remote outpost directly to the coastal defense grid at Fort Stevens. 2 years later, this infrastructure was upgraded with a direct telephone line, theoretically neutralizing the extreme psychological friction of the isolated operator deployment. However, this advanced communication vector was almost immediately terminated when a severe localized kinetic event physically severed the underwater transmission cable. Recognizing the facility's vulnerability, Command authorized significant structural hardening protocols in 1898 to reinforce the primary defensive envelope against continuous maritime bombardment.
We need
The
to
original
secure this
iron roof
bracket
structure
before
was
the next
aggressively
panel.
retrofitted
Got it.
with heavy steel
Did you check the
I-beam
wiring on the
supports
last one?
and
Yes,
capped
it
with
is
2
all set.
solid feet of high-density concrete shielding. Despite these reinforcements, a massive kinetic anomaly in 1912 successfully breached the perimeter, shattering nearly every standard observation window within the residential sector. Engineers retaliated by permanently sealing the vulnerable western exposures with solid cement and replacing remaining structural voids with 3-inch thick armored maritime portholes. This extreme defensive modification successfully hardened the exterior, but plunged the internal operational space into a permanent state of cavernous tactical darkness. The facility's primary projection technology underwent modernization in 1924, replacing the obsolete oil vapor combustion unit with a high-intensity 300-watt electrical illumination system. By 1932, the installation achieved full internal electrification through the deployment of heavy diesel generators, simultaneously introducing central exit steam heating turbines. This infrastructure upgrade significantly mitigated the chronic thermal deficiency experienced by operators, marginally increasing base efficiency during severe winter operational deployments. The rock's volatile environment maintained a constant state of structural attrition, requiring perpetual capital expenditure to repair damage from extreme kinetic weather events. During a severe winter cycle in 1883, rogue oceanic forces generated enough upward velocity to physically tear holes in the acoustic module's iron roof. In December 1886, hostile wave action caused a sheer half a ton of concrete, shielding directly from the primary foundation matrix. A subsequent December assault in 1887 projected a solid wall of seawater entirely over the focal plane, shattering the primary refractive glass panels. The kinetic violence peaked repeatedly, including a 1913 event where the facility endured a continuous 15-hour bombardment from extreme oceanic surge parameters. The physical toll extended to the topography itself. A 1912 storm generated enough force to sever a 100-ton basalt overhang from the western perimeter. The persistent hostility of the environment occasionally breached operator safety protocols, resulting in catastrophic loss of human capital during routine maintenance operations. In 1911, a secondary operator suffered a fatal kinetic deceleration event, falling 25 feet from the external heavy material transfer derrick into the surf. Despite the continuous cycle of destruction and repair, Tillamook Rock maintained its status as the most vital and expensive maritime outpost in the federal network. All previous operational parameters were permanently rewritten on October 21, 1934, when an unseasonable extratropical cyclone directly impacted the coastal defense sector. Atmospheric sensors at adjacent coastal nodes recorded sustained wind velocities exceeding 109 miles per hour during the peak of the anomaly. The extreme barometric pressure drop generated immense oceanic surges capable of weaponizing the surrounding basalt topography directly against the installation's primary defensive structure. Thousands of gallons of seawater, carrying chunks of fragmented bedrock weighing over 60 pounds, were launched vertically into the upper optical housing. This upward kinetic bombardment completely shattered the lantern room's armored glass, exposing the delicate first-order Fresnel lens to the full force of the tempest. The historic optical array, previously the cornerstone of the region's maritime defense, was instantly reduced to useless silica fragments by the relentless boulder impacts. The structural assault simultaneously obliterated the exterior communication lines and heavy lifting apparatus, plunging the flooded facility into total operational and informational isolation. With the primary beacon extinguished and the lower levels submerged beneath 4 feet of water, the installation suffered a total system failure. Demonstrating extreme improvisational engineering, an isolated operator scavenged components from the destroyed acoustic module and telephone array to construct a functional emergency transmitter. This makeshift radio beacon successfully penetrated the storm's electromagnetic interference, transmitting the critical failure status of the strategic choke point to the mainland command structure. The subsequent damage assessment calculated the necessary infrastructure reconstruction at an unprecedented $16,000, requiring immediate emergency federal capital allocation. Engineers concluded that the shattered Fresnel matrix was fundamentally unrecoverable, necessitating the deployment of a modernized, double-tiered aeromarine rotating beacon to restore optical capabilities. To mitigate future vertical ballistic threats, the replacement lantern was heavily fortified with high-tensile steel mesh, further militarizing the installation's external profile. While the repair cycle was executed with maximum urgency, the strategic asset remained functionally offline until February of the following operational year. Despite the implementation of diesel generation and advanced optics, the Rock's fundamental hostility ensured it remained the most financially draining asset in the Coast Guard inventory. The continuous requirement to rebuild shattered infrastructure after every major winter cycle created an unsustainable logistical loop for the federal maritime budget. Concurrently, the rapid advancement of shore-based radar and long-range electronic navigation systems began to theoretically degrade the strategic necessity of isolated optical beacons. Operating an exposed offshore facility was no longer mathematically justifiable when mainland electronic arrays could project deeper into the Pacific operational theater. Yet, the outpost continued its relentless operational tempo through the global conflicts of the mid-20th century, guiding military logistics convoys past the treacherous river mouth. Operators during these cycles maintained total radio silence, operating under wartime blackout protocols while scanning the horizon for submerged enemy submarine assets. The inherent isolation of the facility made it a highly secure, albeit physically punishing, forward observation post for regional coastal defense commands. As the 1950s commenced, the overarching strategic doctrine shifted entirely away from manned offshore optical installations toward automated electronic warning systems. Tillamook Rock's structural degradation had accelerated beyond standard maintenance parameters, with the hostile environment slowly reclaiming the concrete and steel perimeter.
The long-term benefits significantly outweigh the initial investment costs.
That the facility's massive operational overhead outweighed its diminishing tactical value. The order was formalized to permanently decommission the installation, substituting the complex human-operated facility with an automated, low-maintenance oceanic whistle buoy. This strategic pivot represented the final triumph of automated technological efficiency over the brute force human subjugation of a hostile maritime environment. On September 1st, 1957, the final commanding officer executed the shutdown sequence, permanently severing the electrical feed to the aeromarine beacon. The final operational commander, Oswald Allik, formalized the decommissioning via a physical
Tell him we have confirmation on the final report.
Returning the asset to environmental control. His final intelligence report acknowledged the installation's historical utility while confirming its permanent strategic obsolescence. With the primary power matrix severed, the concrete and steel superstructure was officially abandoned to the relentless kinetic forces of the Pacific theater. For 2 decades, the derelict infrastructure endured extreme meteorological bombardment without the benefit of continuous human maintenance protocols.
We finally have a place of our own.
The decommissioned asset cycled through multiple private
Here are the
ownership
keys.
entities,
Congratulations.
attempting to extract
Thank you. We
residual
love
commercial
it.
value.
Sell everything right now.
The inherent logistical hostility
We're down
of the
30%.
offshore
I can't hold it.
neutralized all
gone.
conventional
It's all
economic
gone. We are
exploitation
finished.
models. Aerial insertion via specialized rotary wing aircraft remained the sole viable method of personnel transfer, rendering overhead costs mathematically prohibitive. In
partnership is going to redefine the downtown area. Cheers.
Acquired the strategic coordinate with
Absolutely,
a
we are looking
unorthodox
forward to the
monetization
groundbreaking.
strategy.
According to the
syndicate
plans, the
initiated
new
a
niches should
structural
align
conversion,
perfectly here.
attempting to repurpose
All right, I'll
the
adjust the
hardened bunker
spacing
into
now.
a localized maritime columbarium facility. Branded the Eternity at Sea Columbarium, the operation established a capital extraction model ranging from $1,000 to $5,000 per biological containment unit. The strategic objective was to market the extreme isolation of the facility as a premium post-mortem storage parameter. Market penetration remained statistically negligible, with only 30 civilian assets successfully transferring remains to the offshore containment sector. The fundamental logistical vulnerability of the coordinate ultimately collapsed the commercial venture's supply line. By 1999, the regional regulatory apparatus officially revoked the syndicate's operational license, terminating the columbarium program.
I have reviewed the arguments, counsel, and the motion for dismissal is hereby
denied by the regional command hierarchy.
Sell everything right now. We have to get out.
The derelict infrastructure was reintroduced to the open real estate market, functioning as a highly distressed asset. Current market analysis indicates zero sustained commercial interest due to the overwhelming capital requirements for baseline structural stabilization. The coordinate experiences virtually zero human insertion, save for intermittent, highly specialized biological survey teams. These irregular volunteer detachments execute localized structural diagnostics while monitoring the repopulation of indigenous biological assets. Nature has successfully executed a complete tactical reclamation of the offshore anomaly. Thousands of pinniped biological units and regional avian assets have re-established permanent occupation of the basalt foundation. The coordinate is now fully integrated into the Federal Environmental Protection Grid, designated as part of the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge.
This data point is crucial. It clearly demonstrates the success of the new strategy, exceeding our initial expectations.
For 77 operational cycles, the federal apparatus utilized brute force engineering to subjugate a lethal geographic choke point. The installation demanded constant capital injection and exacted a severe psychological and physical toll on deployed team operators. It functioned as a static defensive node in a highly dynamic kinetic theater, holding the line until technological automation rendered it obsolete. The massive concrete shell now stands as a defining monument in 19th century infrastructural ambition and maritime logistics strategy. Modern naval operations rely on synchronized satellite positioning and automated offshore buoys, entirely bypassing the need for exposed human observation posts. Yet, the historical data set generated by Tillamook Rock's operational lifespan remains highly relevant to modern coastal defense engineering. It provides localized metrics on maximum oceanic kinetic force, structural fatigue, and the logistical realities of isolated forward operating bases. The initial strategic assessment that a physical beacon was mathematically required to secure the Columbia River bar proved tactically correct for its era. The resulting drop in maritime asset vaporization validated the massive federal expenditure and justified the extreme operator attrition rates. Today, the threat profile of the Pacific coastline remains geographically static, but our defensive countermeasures have evolved into the electromagnetic spectrum. The physical subjugation of the rock has been replaced by the invisible geometry of radar grids and automated acoustic warnings. Tillamook Rock's transition from apex strategic asset to abandoned biological preserve illustrates the inevitable cycle of military-industrial deployment. Infrastructure is dictated by technological capacity. As technology scales, obsolete hardware is routinely abandoned to the elements. The Pacific Theater will continue to deploy extreme weather anomalies against the coastline, testing whatever systems command places in their path. Automated buoys now absorb the kinetic punishment that once shattered armored glass and steel. The human operators who man the optical array are no longer required to endure the psychological friction of the maritime void. Their operational records, however, maintain the institutional memory of the Columbia River bar's inherent lethality. This concludes
In conclusion,
the
data clearly indicates a strong upward trend, surpassing our initial projections by 15%.
For continuous updates on regional geopolitical shifts and military infrastructure analysis, engage with the primary command node. Acknowledge receipt of this
data transfer
intelligence by
complete.
confirming
Your files
visual
are
and
now
acoustic
ready.
data transfer protocols. Independent operational analysis requires sustained logistical support from forward operators and allied civilian nodes. Specialized tactical deep dives are accessible via our secure, compartmentalized intelligence network. The integration of independent funding streams ensures the preservation of objective, system-level strategic analysis. Maintain situational awareness of your localized operating environment and strictly adhere to established safety parameters. Ensure all communication channels remain open for imminent deployment of subsequent analytical frameworks. Operational security remains paramount.
We have a breach on Sector Gamma. Reroute the data immediately.
Confirmed. Rerouting now.
Briefing terminated. Thank you for your time.
Secure the channel and stand
Excellent
by
work.
for
We'll follow
further
up.
strategic directives.